Television, located in beautiful downtown Missoula, Montana. Now, here's your host, Neil Chase.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's show of Baha'i Phone and Live. We've got a wonderful presentation planned for you. It'll be a live talk, and you'll be able to call in with your questions after tonight's talk. But there's been some interesting things developing in the news and some other things that we're going to be speaking of first. The first thing that I've got here is an article, well, actually a letter to the editor from the Missoulian this week of September 14th, 1994. This is a letter to the editor from Sally Liljel in Plains, Montana, and it's called "Tyranny is Still Tyranny." And here's what she writes. Our Declaration of Independence listed a number of grievances against Great Britain, a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. And that's a quote from the Declaration. And she goes on to write, the list accused the king of dissolving colonial governments, controlling judges, sending swarms of officers to harass our peoples, sending in armies of occupation, cutting off colonial trade with other parts of the world, taxing the colonists without their consent, and waging war against them, transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny. And these are also quotes from the Declaration. Does this all sound familiar? Our federal government, corrupt and swollen beyond our founding fathers' worst nightmares, is guilty of almost every one of these injuries and usurpations. States' rights are constantly being infringed upon. All Supreme Court appointees must survive a battery of political tests designed to weed out any candidate not perfectly fitting the desired mold. Rumors circulate about the sightings of armory bearing suspicious resemblance to UN forces. This has been spotted in Tennessee and Kentucky and also in the mountains here in Montana, in which foreign Gurkha forces that the Brits used to hire as mercenaries from India are also known to have been participating in the maneuvers of the United Nations here in Montana, as well as UN tanks and things being transported by train in this area. What's going on? Tax and spend seems to be the extent of most elected officials' vocabularies. In response to public outcry at crime rates caused by weak, ineffectual court systems, the government's answer is to spend more money and disarm the people. Legitimate trade, both domestic and with other parts of the world, is cut off by these useless political maneuvers. When citizens protest the encroachments against their Second Amendment rights, armed federal agents are sent in to, quote, complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny, such as in Waco, Texas, with the Koresh people, and also up here with Weaver in Idaho. As the poor rioters in Boston shouted in 1776 when ordered to show up for military draft, which the rich could avoid by paying for substitutes, tyranny is tyranny, let it come from whom it may. And so our friend from Plains raises a real concern. Look at the tyranny that's taking place in the world today. We're just a few days away from an entire war and invasion against the country of Haiti. Why? Well, what we see here is that Warren Christopher was on the news just a few days ago explaining the situation. And I've got a quote from Warren Christopher here, in which he stated that there are only two countries in our hemisphere that are non-democratic. And he didn't state which these were, but it was very clear that this referred to Haiti and Cuba, that there were two non-democratic countries in our hemisphere that are still out there. So what's the problem with that? In other words, there's only two countries that are in this hemisphere of the world that are not in compliance with the United Nations and UN policies, and therefore they have to go. That in order for Bush's plan for the world order, which Clinton is now his world order, and these trilateralists and Bilderbergers and people with money behind the scenes need to accomplish, is they can't have any loopholes anywhere. if Cuba were to remain in the state that it's in our hemisphere, this would be a loophole. Sort of like at the time of Kennedy in the Bay of Pigs in the Cuban Missile Crisis, they saw that even if one island or landmass is not under United States control or UN control in this hemisphere, it might pose a threat to their plans at any time. And therefore they need to be stamped out. And Haiti is on this list along with Cuba. Well, Dan Rather was on the news tonight, and he says, therefore, the United States must go into Haiti. They must have a solution to this problem. And the American armies will go in and with lightning speed, he said, and with powerful crushing, and they will completely destroy the Haiti military. And we're assured total victory in that conflict. Well, obviously, the United States would have total victory over Haiti. There's no way that they can compare to this nuclear superpower of the United States. And this makes the United States a terrorist nation, because they use their nuclear weapons to terrorize small countries in the third world. And all of them is under the United States and UN control, except for Haiti and Cuba. Well, the first thing they did is they dropped off a bunch of radios, little portable radios, from an airdrop all throughout Haiti. And it's only 10,000 square miles of country. Why'd they do this? Well, it's for this reason. The people that dropped it, in case you don't know, are from the Psychological Operations Division of the military, or PSYOPs. And it has to do with mind manipulation and mind control. In other words, it's a terrorist tactic which they're using under the guise of alerting citizens when the attack will take place. So they say, well, this way the citizens can hear when the attack is going to begin on the radio and seek safety. But the real underlying reason is terrorism. So they can broadcast a terrorist message over the radio that the big bully of the United States is coming into their country, and that anybody that stands in the way will be crushed beneath their feet. And this is the reason why these radios was dropped. It's another terrorist tactic. Down in Waco, Texas, when they burned Koresh and his people to the ground and shot them and tear gassed them and set fire to their buildings and property, one of the things that the ATF, the FBI's division of the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms had was large loudspeakers playing music to harass and terrorize the people in the Seventh-day Adventists that were down there with Koresh at the Branch Davidian complex. And they were playing a song by Nancy Sinatra. These boots was made for walking. And it says, burn, baby, burn. These boots were made for walking, and they're going to walk all over you. And then they burned them down. Well, they called in to the fire department, the FBI did, and they said, might need some fire trucks out here. And they says, well, would you want us to send some ambulances out there too in case there's some burn victims and get our hospitals ready for these people? And the FBI said no. They didn't want any ambulances and not to ready the hospitals for any burn victims. And the type of tear gas they used was highly flammable. Well, it's the same thing taking place in Haiti. But Haiti can't defend itself. It's a poor country. And it doesn't have allies to unite behind it. But Saddam Hussein in Iraq is a different story. He's got the entire Arab world to unite behind him. And Kazakhstan, that was formerly part of the Soviet Union, is an Islamic country that has nuclear capabilities. And Saddam still wants to take revenge for what's happened in the Gulf War. So the purpose here is we see this tyranny that's existing in the world. It's being exported by the United States in the name of the United Nations. Look at how sick the world is with this type of thing. Who can fight against this? In one saying in the Bible, it says, who can fight against the beast? Nobody can. So what type of solution can we have for problems that exist on such a global scale, where although it's destined that the planet would move toward internationalism, even as cities form nations and nation building has reached its peak, this is the next step, obviously, we have people that are tyrannical in the driver's seat, leading us into this, doing it in the name of Christianity even. What could be more hypocritical? So here we see, as Thomas Jefferson wrote, as we read last week here, that sometimes the tyrants is the clergy and the Christian clergy. And we read a full article on that also appeared in the paper. So what can help the world? What type of cure is there? What we need is a miracle. And that's what we have, a miracle to cure the world. And on August 20th, a white buffalo is born that's name is Miracle. Now this miracle fulfills an ancient prophecy from the Native Americans. And the prophecy is that the sign that when this white buffalo would be born in the world, that this would be the same type of a sign as the Christians of the birth of Jesus, that there be a promised one in the world at this time. Now, where this buffalo was born was in Wisconsin, and it was born on August 20th or 21st, right around that time of year. And where it was born, and when it was born, and why it was born, and why it's born now, are all very important. We're going to be getting into these things. Now, this is a very significant miracle. Not only do they name this white buffalo miracle, but right now, in the past, in the 1800s and before, there used to be about 80 million buffalo in this country. And now there's only 130,000. And the birth of this type of white buffalo, and this is a female calf, white buffalo, is maybe 1 out of 10 million. And that's an estimate by the National Buffalo Association. Now, the Native Americans were getting worried with the buffalo being wiped out the way they were. They knew that the last sign they were waiting for was the birth of this buffalo. And they were given this prophecy by the white buffalo calf woman, which came to the Lakota Sioux Indians hundreds of years ago, if not thousands of years ago, and left this prophecy with them. And when she left this prophecy with them, she told them that it would be, that this buffalo would appear right at the time of the end to signify the end of the cycle and the day of the purification. And that after this purification, when the world is cleansed through a catastrophe of both fire and water, that then the world hoop, or that is all of humanity, will sit together in one family or one world hoop, and there will be peace on earth and justice established from this time forth and forevermore. Now, the fire is the fire of a thermonuclear war, and this will be the first wind of destruction. Then there'll be a meteor that hits the earth and a great earthquake. And the water comes in the fourth wind, which is the earth-shifting crust. When the Earth's crust shifts, and Albert Einstein wrote about this in Hapgood's book, The Earth-Shifting Crust, the United States will move 2,000 miles south in about 2 weeks. And all the land mass in the United States between the Appalachian Mountains and the Rocky Mountains will be filled with water. It'll be another ocean. Well, these plains between the Rocky Mountains and the Appalachian is where the Sioux hunted the buffalo. And in their own prophecy, it talks about how the waters will flood that entire area of this country. Now, Floyd Hand is one of the Lakota Sioux, and the name Lakota means allies. And his native name is Looks for Buffalo. And early in May of this year of 1994, he had a dream and a vision in which a beautiful maiden appeared to him in a rainbow gown. And he saw that the white buffalo was about to be born, not to a Native American, but to a white man that had a farm. And sure enough, on August 20th or 21st, this white buffalo was born in Wisconsin. And he speaks of these prophecies and reckons it as being like the return of Jesus. And what he said was that this is an apocalyptic symbol. In the North American Indian country, we've been anticipating her coming since 1933 or 34. The second coming of Christ is like this. That is what is happening. We're going to pray for the healing of nations. We're going to pray for the healing of the earth. And we're going to be one heart, one mind, and of one spirit, and unify the four sacred colors, or all the races of the world, so that we can unify as one family and stand for peace. Now, there's a lot of different varying ideas about this. That this prophecy, although it was preserved by the Lakota Sioux, or the allies, the Lakota Sioux, it doesn't belong exclusively to them. That when the world sits in the world hoop, it will be a council of Baha'u'llah's Universal House of Justice elected by all the nations of the world. And when you sit at a council, you might have an idea as participating in this. And any one person can put their ideas forward. Well, once an idea is put forward and laid on the table, and in Robert's Rules of Order it might be seconded, it's no longer the possession of those that came up with the idea, but it belongs to the body of the assembly. And the proof of this is an Oneida native man, not a Lakota or from that tribe. And after the buffalo was born, he had a dream, and he prophesied that he says, right after the birth of this buffalo, the father buffalo will die. And it did just 3 days later. And this shows that the potency of this message is not limited just to the Lakota Sioux, but it was with the Oneida, and as it was born with the white farmer, it's for all the people of the world. And we're going to talk more about this, but we have a video clip that you want to see, and I think we might be ready to roll that now. Are we ready to roll that clip? Okay, we're going to roll this clip, and we'll come back to you in about a few minutes.
Jerusalem, Mecca, and Rome are among the holiest sites in the world. And now, a small farm in Wisconsin has become a sacred site to some Native Americans. Many have been making a pilgrimage to pay their respects to a baby buffalo. Frank Courier tells why some say her birth fulfills an ancient prophecy in tonight's Eye on America.
To a modest 40-acre farm near Janesville, Wisconsin,
How many cars in your caravan?
the curious and the faithful stream from round the world for a glimpse at what many say is a miracle.
There she comes.
An extremely rare month-old female white buffalo calf.
Oh, look how fast it is.
The sun was shining through the trees, and when the calf stood up, I couldn't believe that it was white. I thought my eyes were playing a trick on me until she walked out into the sun.
Buffalo farmer Dave Hyder would learn, as word quickly spread, the birth of this lady calf is to Native Americans the most sacred event of the century, signaling a new era of reconciliation among all races.
The time that baby Jesus was born, this is the same thing.
For Indians like Loma Star Yellowwood, it brings joy and renewed hope.
How are you, sister?
This week, Native American spiritual leaders joined tribal elders from the Dakotas on a pilgrimage to Hyder's pasture to give thanks and pay homage to the calf.
It is like we're being reborn. We're seeing something that God has sent down to us to see and try to change our ways.
Indians believe the birth fulfills an ancient tribal prophecy.
Where the world's going to change, and when that changes come, it's going to be peace, love, and harmony.
It is the return of a legendary female white buffalo that loomed thousands of years ago, promising to come back and reunite a troubled world.
It's very special, and no harm should come to this calf.
To safeguard the spirit, visitors have hung on the fence symbolic offerings of sage and tobacco, dream catchers, feathers, and medicine bags.
All they signify safety and that their prayers be answered.
Over the past 2 centuries, the birth of a white buffalo calf has been so rare, Native Americans have placed the odds at nearly 1 in 10 million. The last most famous white buffalo was born in 1933, but he was male and to Indians less symbolic. Today, as huge herds of North American bison make a comeback from near extinction, a return from the last century when 80 million roamed the countryside, High Plains ranchers are accustomed to seeing but one color.
We have seen some with a little bit of white in them here and there, but we've never run across a purebred white buffalo before.
Because it means so much to so many, Dave Hyder says he won't sell the calf and instead has set up a trust fund for the future.
I guess this calf has really touched a lot of people and it's brought a lot of people together.
It is, for Native Americans, the revival of an ancient legend. One heart, one mind, and spirit. The sacred white buffalo's gift, they say, to the world. In Janesville, Wisconsin, Frank Courier for Eye on America.
Okay, now some of the people don't realize the significance of this, and New Agers and different ones have been traveling down there and not only just giving presents to leave there, but they've been praying to the buffalo. They think it's an incarnation of God, and different ones have been doing different things of this nature. Sort of a golden calf type syndrome like we have in the Bible. But what it is a prophesied sign. And where it comes from is the Lakota Sioux prophecies from the white buffalo calf maiden. Now, a long time ago, what happened, this is how the story goes, that these two ones was out hunting, and they had their bow and arrow, and they look over there, and they see a beautiful maiden coming toward them, dressed in pure white buckskin. And as she approaches them, the one of them says to the other, "Hey, she's so beautiful, let's have sex with her." And the other one says, "No, this is a holy person. We don't want to do something like that." And so the white buffalo calf woman allows the one that wants to have sex with her to come real close to her. And he approaches her, and then the two of them is enveloped in a cloud. And when the cloud parts away, the white buffalo calf woman is standing there, the maiden is standing there, and at her feet is human bones and worms crawling all around them. And then she goes up and talks to the other one that was still alive and says that she has a special message to give to his people, that she wants them to build a special lodge, and she will come there and talk to them. So he goes back and they build this lodge. Well, at this time, the Lakota Sioux were starving and destitute and poor. They were living in an area where they couldn't make good for themselves, and it was bad. And so the white buffalo calf woman comes there, and she gives them this message. And she circles around their lodge 7 times, and she tells them of a special thing, and she gives them this special pipe. And this pipe was made of a red stone representing the red earth, or all the world of humanity. And on this stone was carved a buffalo. And then it had a wooden pole that was the stick or the stem of the pipe, and then there were 12 eagle feathers that was on it. And she says the stick of wood represents the vegetable kingdom which grows and reproduces, and the 12 feathers is of the eagle, which represents 12 rays of the sun. And the pipe is never put together, but part of the ceremony is assembling the pipe, where this branch of wood has to be put in this red bowl. Well, this bowl represents the world hoop of humanity, all of humanity, and not just the Native Americans, that's the red man, but in the Bible, Adam literally means red man or red earth, and all the people are made out of the same minerals or the same dust from the earth. And from all the races, we will elect this world hoop or this universal house of justice of Baha'u'llah. And the wooden branch represents a lineage that goes back to David, that Baha'u'llah is descended from, that's the guardianship or the head of this universal house of justice. And the 12 feathers represents the 12 original members of this council as it goes through a 4-stage plan from being the Second International Baha'i Council to being the World Court and then the Supreme Tribunal and then the fully elected Universal House of Justice. And when they put this thing together, the feathers has to be put on the stick to be put right at the hub where the bowl is. And she gave them this. Well, when she left, she transformed into a reddish-brown buffalo and rolled on the ground, it says. And then she stood up and she was like a black buffalo and rolled on the ground. And then she stood up again and she was a white buffalo and went off. And from that point onward, they were waiting for another buffalo, the same white buffalo, to be born, similar to the way that she left. Well, when she first appeared to them, she told them about another teacher who had been there long before her that had given them 2 of their ceremonies, and that she was giving them 1 more, which is the ceremony of the pipe, and that they would be given a total of 7 altogether even after her, that they would receive through visions and other things along this lines. So what it talks about this buffalo is very important. It gives us a scenario, and that according to the Lakota, it's believed that at the beginning of the cycle of the buffalo, so there's a cycle of the buffalo, there was placed in the west to hold back the waters, that every year this buffalo loses 1 hair. In every age, this loses 1 leg. When all his hair and all the 4 legs is gone, then the waters will rush in once again, and the cycle will come to an end. Well, this cycle, not only does this House of Justice have 4 stages, like the 4 legs of this buffalo, but this cycle began 6,000 years ago at the time of Adam, which means red man also. And we can see this chart right here on the board that this would be the beginning of the cycle. So here we have the beginning of the cycle. See? And then we have 4 legs. That's kind of crooked. Goes down. Okay, so this is the cycle, and here we have the 4 legs of it. Well, this is the appearance of Adam. Now, Adam was also known as Zidek, or the first king of Melchizedek. See? And so this means red man. Well, 2,000 years after Adam, Shem came, and he was known as Melchizedek in the Bible. We can see that on this chart right here. This is Shem. Well, 2,000 years after Shem, Jesus was born. And in the book of Hebrews, it explains that Jesus is also a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. And 2,000 years later, we have the return of Jesus. I'll put Jesus too. And this person is also a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. Now Jesus too was born where? 40 miles right in the same vicinity away from where this buffalo miracle was born, in Racine County in Burlington, Wisconsin. And Racine means the root, and the buffalo was born in Rock County, or by the Rock River. So this buffalo was also born in Wisconsin. Not only was it born in the same location as Dr. Leland Jensen, that fulfills the prophecies for the return of Jesus, the high priest, after the order of Melchizedek, but it was born on about the same day 80 years later, that his birthday is August 22nd of 1914. And August 20th and 21st of 1994 is when the buffalo was born, right at the time of his birthday, which occurs at the 22nd. He's the promised one that the peoples of the world are waiting for, including the Native Americans. So this explains the 4 legs of the buffalo, is that it's at the time of Adam and then Shem and Jesus and then the coming of Dr. Jensen, we have each one of these legs removed. And we finished a 6,000-year cycle. We finished a 6,000-year cycle, and this brings us to today, right around the year 2000. But it's more specific than that. That the legs gives you a general idea of the age of the epochs contained within this 6,000-year scenario. But aside from that, the hair is a lot more specific. It says it's going to lose 1 hair per year. And what we want to look at now is the significance of the hair on this white buffalo. We have another chart that explains this. Okay. Now we'll be getting to that chart in just a second. Now with this chart, what we've been able to do on this program, you've seen it happening for the last 3 or 4 years, about 3 years, that we've been able to accurately predict the start of the Gulf War, the trade tower bombing, the Hebron bungling, the Hebron massacre and the UN bungling of that, the Edison gas explosion, and also the Lincoln Tunnel explosion, which happened on May 2nd of 1994. Now if you look at this chart, we can see where it starts here. Now right here, if you get real close there, it says Revelation 13:5. It talked about how the beast would be born and would have 42 months to live. Well, this is 1,260 days. And each day is a year. That's 1,260 years. Well, the birth of the beast was in 731 AD. And the beast in the book of Revelations has a bear's feet, which is Russia, an eagle's wings, which is the United States, a lion's mouth, which is England, and a leopard's body, which is France. And these are the big 4 Christian nuclear superpowers that's ruling the world through the UN. And the seat of the beast is in New York City. It's the United Nations building. But in front of that building, it talks about the house of the Lord, as if it fulfills the prophecies in the Bible from Isaiah. And that stone that's in front of the UN is called the Isaiah stone, as if the UN was God's promised house of the Lord that would bring peace to the earth. So these people, in the name of God and in the name of Christianity, which are just masquerading as Christians, is exporting this tyranny to all the peoples, even as this country itself was taken away from the Native Americans. And then these Christian hypocrites, according to Jesus in Matthew 23, stole 300 years of wages from the black man also. So the buffalo is sacred to all native tribes, and it represents purity. And this is because it signalizes the day of purification, when all this corruption will be ripped away by a fierce heat of a thermonuclear blast. And the first city to go will be New York City, and then every other city of 100,000 or more in this country will go, as 1/3 of mankind will die in 1 hour of thermonuclear war in Armageddon. And so we want to count the hairs. And Jesus says something about this, that every hair on your head is numbered. So here's some of the numbers for the hairs on the buffalo. And so when we add 1,260 years to 731 AD, we get 1991, which was the start of the Gulf War. We get 1991, which was the start of the Gulf War. It was also the establishment of the Second International Baha'i Council here in Missoula, Montana, which also fulfills Native American prophecies, or the HOPI, that this council will be in Massawa. Then what we see is in Daniel 7:12, he gave us time, season and a time. Well, the time was 1 year that brought us to the Day of the Covenant, or November 26, 1992. And 3 months after this was the season, and in early November on this show and in news releases and in lectures at universities such as the University of Montana, we accurately predicted the trade tower bombing, which took place 3 months later on February 26, 1993. And then we entered into the book of Ezekiel, in which he gives in chapter 4 390 days and then 40 more days. Well, at the completion of the 390 days, we had the Edison gas explosion, which also took place in New Jersey on the exact date given in the scriptures. And 40 days later, we had the May 2nd Lincoln Tunnel explosion, which also took place. Now, Nostradamus, that also prophesied of these things, gave a one-year period in Nostradamus 973 for the UN bungling of the Hebron massacre, which we also predicted 2 weeks before it happened on live television. So altogether, we have 7 things here. If we can go back to the first one, we have the birth of the beast, 1. We have the start of the Gulf War and the setup of the IBC, 2. We have the Day of the Covenant, 3, when the Covenant Breakers met in New York in 1992, and it's now a New York holiday called Baha'i Covenant Day, and Baha'i World Congress Day. That's 3. 4, we have the Trade Tower bombing. 5, the Hebron massacre, which the UN bumbled. 6, March 27, 1994. And 7, May 2nd, 1994. And these are the 7 circles that the buffalo calf will have been made around the lodge. And what she also gave them is a red stone, also made out of the pipestone, which had 7 circles drawn on it. And these 7 circles also represent these same 7 things. And in the book of Revelation, it talks about how there will be 7 seals, and that the Lamb will open the 7th seal. And it says that when he opens the 7th seal, there will be silence in heaven for half an hour. So in one way, these are also like the 7 seals. Now the 7 seals, there's many different sets of 7 that the 7 seals cover, and this is one of those sets of 7. Well, a lot of things in the Bible isn't translated into English too good. For instance, in the King James Bible, it says in Matthew 24, verse 3, that there will be the end of the world. And all these people are scared that the world's going to end. Well, it doesn't say that at all in Greek. In the Revised Standard Version, it gives the correct translation. It says the close of the age, that this age of corruption will close, and then we will have the kingdom of God established. But there'll be a purification that takes place first. There will be catastrophes, but it won't destroy the world. All told, 2/3 of mankind will die in 1 hour, but the third that's left, which is almost 2 billion, it's the same number that we had in the population of the world at the turn of the century in the 1800s, will still survive, but they will all be spiritual. And crime and poverty and ignorance and war and these calamities will disappear, and love and justice and universal brotherhood and harmony and education and enlightenment, these things will appear and be established. There'll be a purification. Well, the birth of this buffalo signalizes the close of the age, as we already read from the Native American prophecy. So after the 7 seals was opened in Revelation 8, it says there'll be silence in heaven for half an hour. Well, we got to thinking maybe it says something else there instead of half an hour. And so we looked it up in Strong's Concordance, and sure enough, the Greek word was hemi, which means half, like hemisphere, but the word for hour didn't just mean hour, it meant a time or a year. Well, a half a year or a half a time is different than half an hour. Well, the way all of our time reckons, it's on the circle, and circles have 360 degrees. An hour is when the hour hand makes the full circle. A year is when the planet makes a full circle around the sun. So it says half a time, or half a year, is half of 360, or it's 180. So this would be 180 days. And we add this to the time of the Lincoln Tunnel explosion on May 2nd. And so I got to draw this here. See? Okay, and this would be 180 days. Okay, and that date that we get is in November. Okay, so 180 days later brings us to November. But when in November? Well, it doesn't say exactly a half hour. It says about half an hour. So 180 days from May 2nd, 1994 brings us to November 29th, 1994. And so give or take a few days, 2 or 3, would be about 180. So 3 days before this is November 26th of 1994, which is the same day as the Day of the Covenant as the Baha'is. So this gives us a specific day of November 26, 1994. Okay, but when this was discovered, there needs to be collaboration. There has to be more to this than just a mistranslation of half a time. So we also looked up the word time in the Bible, where it occurs in the New Testament. In every single place that it occurs in the New Testament, there's one word that's used. except in one place. And that's in Revelation 14:14, where it says there will be a time. So this word is also translated as time in that place. And it says, the time has come, and that the one seated on a cloud with a golden crown on his head will take his sickle and reap the grapes and throw them into the winepress of the wrath of God and tread these grapes underfoot. Well, the wine is a symbol of the covenant, because Jesus said, drink this wine, it's the blood of my covenant. Well, New York City is the city for the Baha'is. It's the city of the covenant. November is the month of the covenant for Baha'is, and November 26th is the day of the covenant. And these covenant breakers met there in 1992, and these calamities have been happening to New York ever since they were allowed in that city. And so this points to November 26, 1994. But there needs to be more to it, and this is why this miracle has occurred. That to collaborate all this is the birth of this white buffalo. That this buffalo, the vision that it would be born, that Looking for Buffalo had, happened in May, right after the Lincoln Tunnel explosion. And in this newspaper article, which is from the Milwaukee Journal, which you've seen, they've got a shot of it that you can see a close-up, it says this, that although the buffalo calves are born with a dark reddish-brown coat, and this calf is all white, that doesn't mean she can't shed it off and her next coat be a normal color, Hayter said. All we can do is wait and see. But regardless of if this calf sheds off its first fur and is a different color, it still fulfills the prophecies of the birth of the female white buffalo. So blood tests can't detect the genetic trait that produces albinos. So Hayter must wait until the calf sheds its first coat in about 3 months to be sure. Well, about 3 months from the birth of this calf on August 20th brings us exactly to where? Well, you've got August and then September. October. You got August, October, September, and November. Is that right? Or did I get them out of order? Okay, we got August, October, September. No, August, September, October, November. So we've got 3 months. I sound as bad as some of the people I know trying to count the days of the resurrection. But so we've got the 3 months of September, October, and November. And in November is when the calf will shed all of these hairs. And that's what the prophecy says, is when the hair is shed, then the cycle closes. So this is a great day. You couldn't want a miracle better than this. See? We just have to wait for this white buffalo to shed its hair. Well, hair is mentioned in the book of Ezekiel also. After Ezekiel gives the 390 days, and then the 40 days, as we can see here on the chart. The 390 days and the 40 days, in chapter 5 of Ezekiel, he says something about his hair. And this buffalo is a symbol of this promised one. And Ezekiel was symbolizing the coming of this promised teacher that was also born in Wisconsin, right about the same exact day as this buffalo was born. And it says this, "O son of man, take a sharp sword and use it as a barber's razor, and shave off the hair and the beard, and make it in a pile, and weigh it in balances, and divide the hair into 3 equal parts, and take a third part of the hair and burn it in the midst of the city." And this is the midst of New York City, where the UN building is the epicenter for the nuclear blast. And then he says, take another third of the hair and scatter it around about the city, which is in the suburbs. And they will also be destroyed in the blast. And take the last third and throw it to the winds, which is the fallout which will go out from New York City. And he says, do this with the hair when the days of the siege are completed. So the days of the siege were completed on May 2nd, when Look for Buffalo then has the dream of the coming of the buffalo, and then all the hair falls off right around the same date of November 26th of 1994. So all of these things is in the works now. Even on the national news, it says this is a miracle. Now we've got a real good show for you tonight. It's coming up. I want you to stay tuned, that we've got some beautiful music that's going to be here, and a real bang-up talk that gets into the meaning of salvation. And you don't want to miss a word of this talk. And you want to stick around so you can call in and ask your questions after it. Because this is what you need to hear. That now that this calamity is coming upon the people, the purification represented by the purity of the white buffalo, that's what you need to know is where your safety is, where your security is, and where your salvation can come from.
while carrying the message of Him who hath caused the dawn of divine guidance to break. Consider how the wind, faithful to that which God hath ordained, bloweth upon all the regions of the earth. Restrained as the wind, while carrying the message of Him. Be unrestrained as the wind, while carrying the message of Him. So should be everyone who claimeth to be a lover of the one true God,
Missoula Community Access Television, located in beautiful downtown Missoula, Montana. Now, here's your host, Neil Chase.
Of Baha'i Phone-In Live. For those of you who have never seen our program tonight, you'll find that it's a unique format in that, one, it's a live program, and two, after tonight's presentation, we're going to open up our phone lines to receive questions from the audience. And sometimes we stay on for an hour or two just fielding these different questions. What makes this unique is a lot of different religions that may be out there, or church settings, and even certain discussion groups, like when we watch TV and we see Bill Clinton having a town meeting, are done in a controlled situation in which only certain questions may be allowed, or in the case of different religions, sometimes questioning is forbidden altogether. That if you were to ask a question about any point that didn't make any sense, or that might appear to your intellect just to be complete nonsense, you're sometimes sneered at as having unbelief, or being an unbeliever, or being riddled with doubts. Some preachers that I've seen in the past have gone so as far as to say that the intellect and the pursuit after truth and the use of the intellect in that pursuit is nothing short of from the devil, according to their own lingo that they use. Well, can we accept something like that? Well, this very tenets that some preachers wave around, we find this quoted in their scripture, in which it says this, that seek the truth, and the truth will set you free. And this search for the truth cannot be done with our heart. Now, and I don't mean this heart in our chest. This is just a pump that circulates the blood. But the heart being the desires of the people, that this heart of ours has desires for different things. And sometimes what we might desire isn't very good for us. Maybe a guy falls for the wrong type of a girl or something of this nature. But we find that it's the intellect, and by going by facts, which is true. In order for our science to put a man on the moon, they didn't just go by their feelings or a gut feeling or their heart. They went by science and the intellect and facts. If we were going to buy a new car, we would go by the facts to get a good deal. And it's the same thing, it should be in the pursuit of all truth. And the reason it says that for those who seek this truth, they will be set free, is one of the great imprisonments of the human spirit is that of being indoctrinated into mythologies or lies or other types of corruptions. And that this is the thing that we must be freed from. All sorts of gook and other types of concepts that might get into our heads that could cause detriment to ourselves and the rest of society. And sometimes society swallows this gook, so to speak, hook, line, and sinker. And this has been the cause of prejudice against the black man with slavery and depriving him of his wages for 400 years, and that of racism against other peoples, intolerance against new concepts to benefit society. At one time, those people that produced science and technology was branded by the leaders of society as witches and warlocks that was in cahoots with all sorts of deviltry and things of this nature. If it would have been for our religious leaders, we'd still be living in hovels, in mud huts, with no central heating, no carpet, no television, no electricity, none of the modern conveniences and modern comforts. So there has to be, and we find that in every day and age there always is, an indomitable spirit which persists and pushes forward to advance society and the people that are in it. Now, one of the things that Plato said, and he's heralded by a lot of people to be somebody that knew something, well, he was actually the student of Socrates, and it's known in the Book of the East that Socrates traveled farther east and studied under the Jewish doctors at the time after Solomon. Well, one of the things we find Plato writes is this. He says, where there is crime, there is no justice. In other words, in a society where we see crime and other ills in this society, the cause of this is an imbalance or an injustice in society in a whole. That if society was just from the outset, is what Plato is speaking of, we would find that crime would be eliminated. But a lot of people, especially the leaders of our society, whether they're religious or they say that they're educational, or those in the mainstream news media, or those in politics and government, can't get a handle on the problems that attack our society. That they seem to go from one symptom to the other in an endless, vicious cycle, not knowing where the beginning and the end is. And for this reason, they're completely missing the root of the problem. If the root of the problem could be identified, the same as we might get a fever and we might get the chills then, we might have a runny nose and a slight cough. Well, somebody might give you something to stop your nose from running, and another person might put blankets around you to keep you warm, and then when you got too hot, they might put ice on you, or they might put leeches on you to drain your blood, and all these other things to relieve the symptoms. We find that there's one root cause, which might be the virus that a person's contracted. And if a method could be determined to isolate that virus and eradicate it, we wouldn't need to treat the symptoms and have Band-Aid type solutions. So the big question on the minds of all thinking people is, what is the root of the problems in our society today? And history shows us that the root of the problem in today is not a new problem. It was the same problem last year. It might be the same problem next year unless we have the solution implemented. And it's been the same problem for thousands of years. This problem is defined by the son of Baha'u'llah, whose name is Abdul-Baha, that came to America in 1912. In this book that I have here, it's called The Secret of Divine Civilization. and it's considered to be the holy scripture or holy writings of the Baha'i faith. Now, what does that mean, holy writings? Well, what this means is that it's something that we don't want to corrupt. By holy or sacred, we mean it's something that people should mind their own business about and allow the creator of the universe and everything in it to speak freely and not bring their own interpretations, misconceptions, bad translations, or dogmas and indoctrinations into it. And he defines here on page 18, right up, what a close intellectual investigation will show to be the cause, the primary cause for these problems. We're going to read this right now from Abdu'l-Baha's writings. What he says is this: close investigation will show that the primary cause of oppression and injustice, and we've got this quote on the screen for you to read it at home. Close investigation will show that the primary cause of oppression and injustice, of unrighteousness, irregularity, and disorder is the people's lack of religious faith and the fact that they are uneducated. So there we have it, that the root of the problem is in the people's fundamentally being uneducated and in their lack of religious faith. Well, what does this mean, lack of religious faith? Well, this does not mean blind faith in ridiculous doctrines, dogmas, and creeds. But this means because of a lack of education, the people can't have an educated view of the way that things are. For instance, a scientist and an engineer, when they put a man on the moon or build a submarine to go under the sea or bring forth all of these inventions, they have to have a certain degree of faith that what they have produced is going to work and hold up under all possible conditions. Therefore, they test what they produce. But also, they have to have faith in the science and in the math and in the principle of the constitution of things and the combination of things from the onstart. For instance, the mathematician and the scientist knows that 2 and 2 is 4. And he has to have faith in his figures when it comes to calculating where the person's going to land on the moon, that that is absolutely correct based on all of the known elements. Well, this is still faith, but it's faith in fact and faith based on intellectual proof. And because of this, an astronaut or someone else is willing to get into the contraption or whatever that they've made because they have faith in the science. Because science is something that is undeniably based in reality, or the way that things exist and are found to be in nature. Now, how does it come to be that we know these things? Well, as Abdu'l-Baha has explained, the primary cause for these ills is a lack of education. Aha! We need an educator. That from the moment we're born into this world, and I have a little baby at home and I'm beginning to learn more about these things, that this baby is in desperate need of an educator. When she was born, she's totally helpless. She needs somebody to feed her, to change her diapers, to clothe her, to keep her warm. And not only that, but when a human baby is born, only about 20 to 30% of the brain is developed. The other 80 to 70% develops as they mature outside of the womb, where that of monkeys and other animals, almost 80% of the brain is matured before they're even born into this world. So this baby's in desperate need of an educator. She doesn't know the language, she can't count, she doesn't know how to walk, she doesn't know her name. She has parents that are able to teach her these things. And if she was just left to the wilds of the world and the environment and the elements, she wouldn't have a chance. See? Unless maybe you might say like Romulus and Remus and wolves came by and took care of her or something like this. But even in these cases, such as Ramu the wolf boy and other ones that they found was raised by wolves, that they find that they miss certain fundamental things in their ages of maturation, which the scientists have determined is approximately 7-year increments. That if they don't learn how to walk and speak and do certain things in that first 7-year period, they might never learn how to do those things, or they might have a fundamental difficulty in ever learning to do them throughout the rest of their lives. that at certain period in our evolution, from the time we're in the womb to the time we're born, we have these ages of maturation where we must receive certain vital parts of our fundamental education, or without this we will be crippled or disabled, or as they sometimes say, handicapped in this type of a way. And you wouldn't want this to happen. People that find themselves in disabilitating situations find it very difficult to get along in everyday tasks. Therefore, we have to have a need of an educator. When I was in school, we had a nice woman that was our teacher, and she was teaching us math. And she wasn't a tyrant, and she didn't wave the math book above her head and tell us if we didn't believe in the numbers, and in addition we were going to burn in hell, and our souls would rot forever, or anything like this. And had she done that, I don't think anybody would have gotten the point of the education anyway. But what she did do is she showed us the truth. For instance, she wanted to prove that 2 and 2 was 4. So she had some apples. And so she puts out 2 apples on the table and 2 more. Now maybe some of the kids in the class, so maybe Johnny thinks 2 and 2 is 5, because when it comes to a piece of candy, he wants to get 1 more. Or maybe Sally thinks 2 and 2 is 3 because 3 is her favorite number. Or they're arguing. Well, the teacher settles this. She puts out 2 apples and 2 more apples, and she says, you count them. And so we already knew how to count, and Johnny can go up there and go 1, 2, 3, 4. He says, oh, it is 4. 2 and 2 is 4. See? It's not 5. And then he confesses, I just wanted another piece of candy. And Sally might get out there and count it 1, 2, 3, 4. She says, I thought it was 3, but now I can see it was 4. And I don't have to take Johnny's word for it. I've seen it and counted it for myself. And the people can accept what the teacher has given. Therefore, we have to have a need for an educator. And therefore, if we have faith in anything in this world, it has to be based on facts and the proof that an educator might possess. Well, in the scriptures of the Old Testament, there's a word for educator. It's the Hebrew word Kohen, and it's been translated into English as priest. But when people think of a priest, they normally think of somebody waving incense around or giving you some wine in a wafer or singing a song or leading a group or something like this. But the ancient Hebrew word Kohen actually means educator. And some people suggested that the Bible could probably use some modernization in the way it's translated to get to the roots of these things. But we do find in a Strong's Concordance that gives us the ancient words that this means educator. But out of all the different priests that was of the tribe of Moses, of Levi, and those of his brother Aaron that were educators, there was one that Moses picked, his brother Aaron, and his sons that was to be the high priests. Well, high means great, and this meant the great educator of the people in their day. And the purpose of this was to bring a certain type of teaching to the people so they could live in harmony with one another without being prejudiced, without murdering each other, without rape and warfare in the streets, without wars and thievery and these type of things taking place. And after Moses was there, he knew that they would still need an educator after his parting. So he set up a system by which the people would be able to become educated. But what we find is this, that the different religions of the world become polluted by the leadership. Now Moses had a few good things going for him. One, he had 10 commandments. And they asked him what the essence of his law was. And this is in the book of Deuteronomy. He says, love your neighbor as yourself and love God above all else. And these 10 laws were 10 expressions of this concept of loving our neighbor. So he had that going for him. He had something else going for him. For those people that were just so stubborn, there was 10 plagues that he had going for him. And that if they didn't listen after the first time he told them, then it got bad. And they brought these things on themselves. And then after the second time, there was another one. And these were 10 great proofs in the forms of catastrophe. And catastrophe sometimes performs a necessary task in education. But it's not the people that go out and get punished by somebody else, and it certainly isn't the creator of the universe and everything in it punishing the people. We find that the punishment is built into the crime. For instance, if I take my hand and I stick it in the fire, my hand's going to get burned. Ow! See? Well, the fire's hot. Well, is this because God is mean and he's punishing me for putting my hand in the fire? Did God burn my hand? Did the Creator do this? No. It's the fire itself that burns my hand. Well, does that mean that it does that? Let's say the fire didn't burn my hand. I'd put my hand in the fire and I wouldn't feel it, and I'd leave my hand in the fire until it was burnt completely off. Ah! And I'd be going like this. I wouldn't have a hand anymore. So the pain that you feel from putting your hand in the fire is merciful, that all punishments we find, so to speak, are remedial. The pain is a remedy for the situation, which could be losing your hand. But we hear these incredible stories that are put forth that are interpreted to us. Now, although Moses had these things going for him, the 10 Commandments which he received on Mount Sinai, and the 10 proofs that he had in catastrophe form that he gave to Pharaoh, there's something that was going against this. And we find that this becomes the rabbis and the clergy that have totally taken over and corrupted the meanings of these things. And the Christian clergy continues to promote strange fables and concepts. And therefore the people cannot have faith in religion. Now, one thing Abdu'l-Baha said is the Baha'i cause can never be organized. It's impossible to organize spirituality. And some people say, well, God is love, and if we just loved one another, this would solve the problem. Well, wait a minute. Some people say religion is love, but what about mercy? What about mercy, too? Well, yeah, that's good. Well, what about generosity? Well, that's a good one also. And justice. They says, oh, we could really use some justice. Elimination of prejudice. Oh, that's a good one. We find that these are the qualities and attributes of the Creator, and they're innumerable, and they have no limit, and they're infinite. Love, mercy, justice, generosity, concord, fidelity, harmony. That the people were to absorb this teaching from certain individuals. And therefore, when they went to Jesus, he just reiterated what Moses said, that to love thy neighbor as thyself and God above all else. Well, the clergy of that day had so misinterpreted the scriptures that Jesus added something a little more into this. He said, it's the spirit of the law that gives life, and the letter of the law killeth. Meaning that this spirit, to love our neighbor as ourselves, no matter who he is, black, white, Chinese, polka dot, purple, Muslim, Jew, Christian, no matter what, that this was the spirit of the law. Well, Jesus didn't get a chance to get on worldwide television. They didn't have computers back then. Moses wasn't able to either. He could just talk to a certain number of people. So would God abandon everybody else? Well, a great civilization rose up in India through the teachings of spirituality, through Krishna, that says love your neighbor as yourself and God above all else. And the great civilizations of the East, the Zoroastrian, Persian civilization, the dynasties under Cyrus the Great, and those of China, where Buddhism was brought from the Buddha, and those we find in the West of Christianity, and those that educated the wild and barbaric Arabic people under the divine and inspired teachings of Muhammad. Were you to put Muhammad and Jesus and Moses and Krishna and Buddha and Zoroaster in the same room, they would just get along fantastically. But you put Jews and Christians and Muslims and these other ones in the same room, and you have a big bloody fight in the name of their religion. And this is something that's beyond the imagination. We can't imagine anything worse than a dogmatic religious fanatic. Actually, there is something worse than a dogmatic religious fanatic. This is a militant religious fanatic. Somebody that arms themselves and goes into the burial place of Abraham with a machine gun and shoots down people while they're worshiping. And the other types of atrocities that we see. Therefore, if we turn back to our quote on the board, we can see that the primary cause for oppression and injustice is that the people are uneducated and their lack of religious faith. Well, what can we do to remedy this situation? Well, in order to remedy this, we have to have education. And I'm going to show two interesting points here to kind of sum up some of these things. that because religion has become polluted by the clergy class that's selling Jesus Christ on the cross for $1, even if you put different groups of Christians in the room, they'd be fighting with each other. Statistically, we know in 1995 there's over 22,000 of warring factions of Christianity, each calling the other one the liar and from the devil. So they testify against each other. So this pollution is nothing but dirty water. Well, the thing is, we don't want to throw the baby out with the dirty bath water. We need to get an education. Well, one of the things that we know, for instance, take Moses crossing the Red Sea. That is almost an unbelievable story. How can we have faith in the Scripture when we read some outlandish tale about Moses raising a stick in the air and the water parting and everybody running across? Now, maybe 2,000 years ago, when the people thought Apollo pulled the sun across the sky in a chariot, we might have accepted this. But today, in our scientific world, this is outlandish and outrageous. And it's things like this that cause people, in their uneducation, to have no religious faith at all. But we don't want to throw that baby out with the dirty bathwater. Well, I had a friend of mine that wanted their son to get a religious education. And they were sending Sammy to school, and he came back from home one day. And he says, Mommy, I just got back from school. And she says, oh, Sammy, that's wonderful. What did you learn today? He says, don't ask me. Don't ask. He says, well, why not? He says, you'll never believe me. Well, no, go on. Tell me anyway. He says, you won't believe it. He says, look, just tell me. He says, okay. Well, we got there, and we got to the part of the Bible about Moses crossing the Red Sea. And she says, what happened? Well, Moses was being chased by Pharaoh's army. And Moses had a bunch of people too. It was his army. And he was fleeing from Pharaoh. And his mommy says, go on. What else happened? Well, he says that Pharaoh's army was launching grenades at Moses to try to stop him. And Moses had a flank of people machine gunning behind them to put down Pharaoh's army that was approaching in the tanks. And then they came to the Red Sea, and they were able to get big pontoon boats out and build a bridge across the river. And then Moses led the people across the pontoon bridge, but he was smart, and they put dynamite in the middle of it. And when Pharaoh's army and his tanks came up on the pontoon bridge, Moses jumped up on the TNT box, and he had Aaron and Joshua dynamite the bridge, and it blew up, and Pharaoh's army went down in the Red Sea, and they all died. And his mom says, Sammy, that's not what they told you in Sunday school. It didn't happen like that. And he says, Mama, if I told you what they told me, you'd think it was an even bigger story. You'd never believe it. That it just seems so outlandish. Well, what happens, we know, how can water part? How could a Red Sea part? Well, we know that gravity can do this, that the moon pulls on the oceans and causes tides. In parts of Nova Scotia, up in upstate New York and Canada, there's one place where the ocean floor is just bone dry, and there's boats laying on the sand. And then at a certain time of day, and it's almost like clockwork, a 40-foot tide wave comes in and fills up the whole area. And this is just done by the moon and its influence upon the tides. Well, in this book, Worlds in Collision, by Emanuel Velikovsky, that's a historian and a scientist, he's able to demonstrate that there was a comet that came very close to the Earth circa 1450 BC, and that the gravitational force of this comet coming close to the Earth is described in the Old Testament as a pillar of fire in the night and a pillar of smoke in the day. And the gravity of this was able to part the Red Sea. And it also caused strange phenomena to take place, as we know from Nobel Prize winning scientists on the Oort cloud, that as these comets pass through the Oort cloud, they pick up genetic DNA material, and that there's seeds of life in this. And they fall down out of the sky, and they get caught up in the weather patterns. And frogs and other things have been known to rain in Mexico and other places from this type of phenomena, which is documented in Corliss's Handbook of Scientific and Unusual Phenomena, that a comet coming very close to the Earth at the time of Moses would cause the iron oxide dust of it, the red dust, in the comet's tail would cause the Nile to turn red like blood. The gravity of the main comet's body would cause the Red Sea to part. And the genetic material from the Oort cloud, as documented by these scientists, would cause frogs and other life forms to rain down out of the sky in the multitudes, and so forth and so on. And this accounts for all the plagues at the time of Noah. Now, if you were to, at the time of Moses, now if you were to read Corliss's scientific handbook of unusual natural phenomena, as well as this book by Immanuel Velikovsky, we get a closer shot of this, Worlds in Collision, you would become educated as to the nature of these scientific realities. Now, with this type of an education, the question changes. It's no longer, well, did that happen at the time of Moses? But now we can see how we could have faith based on fact that these type of calamities happen at that time. And this changes the scenario for thinking people to ask the next question. How in the heck did Moses know that the sea was going to part right at that time, even if all these other things caused it? Because the same being that created the universe and everything in it, that gave Moses laws to form a better society, in which our modern law code is still based on these type of commandments, also informed him of the precise day, minute, hour, and second that this would take place, so that his people could be free to go into a promised land. And after Moses, we had an educator to continue this, such as that of Aaron, the great educator, or the Kohen Gadol, and that of Joshua, his establisher. Well, the other question is, well, okay, even if you could explain that, how do you explain the burning bush? See? Well, we've got a videotape that we're going to show right now that proves that growing right on Mount Sinai is a bush that burns and with fire on it, but the bush itself isn't consumed. And it's called the flaxinella, or the gas plant, the Talmus albus. And it just so happened that Moses was in front of this bush when he received the message that he would be the educator for his day to free those particular people from slavery. And I believe we're ready to roll that tape right now. Okay, here we go.
Moses fled to the wilderness of Medea to escape the Pharaoh's death sentence. He was befriended by Jethro, a Midianite priest. He married his daughter. For 40 years, Moses lived the simple life of a shepherd. Then, in a matter of minutes, he came to know his destiny when for the first time, God's voice spoke to him from the midst of a bush that flamed brightly but was not destroyed.
I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I have seen the misery of my people who are enslaved in Egypt. You, Moses, are going toward the Pharaoh and lead my people out of their bondage in Egypt.
Who am I to lead the Israelites out of Egypt? Why should Pharaoh listen to me?
Do not fear, for I shall be with you. Take your brother Aaron and go now.
Moses' encounter with the burning bush is one of the most memorable stories in the Bible, and certainly one of the most controversial. We are told by the Bible that not only did the bush burst into flame, but it was not consumed by the fire. This has long been questioned by Bible critics. So he went to Israel to question the experts there on the subject.
At the foot of Mount Sinai, one finds the monastery of St. Catherine. The local story of the shepherds, the nomadic people, the Bedouins, do hold that the actual bush that is found inside the monastery is still the same bush.
I can't confirm or reject that the bush growing at the monastery was the actual burning bush, but it is a specific desert plant that fits the biblical description. It's the fraxinella, or gas plant, Dictamnus albus, a sturdy perennial bush with white or purple flowers, common in the Middle East. The bush produces an oil so volatile that it can be ignited by the sun. The oil quickly burns up, but the bush itself is not damaged.
Well, there we have something scientific. The Diatomnus albus, the flaxinella plant. It secretes an oil on its leaves, which are cup-shaped. And the way they used to light their lamps back in the days of Moses was with olive oil. They'd put it in a little cup. They'd have a wick that would absorb this, or they might light the oil directly. That this leaves of the plant would collect oil on them, and the intensity of the sun focused in the concavity of those leaves would cause flames to be all over this plant without consuming the bush. And this is the exact description of the plant that Moses was in front of. Now, whether it's that same plant in that monastery or it was another part of the mountain, it doesn't matter. That we know that this was the plant because it says that he stood in front of the bush, it was burning, but it wasn't consumed. And people can go to this monastery and see this bush and see the flames on it. Now, I have a dear, dear friend of mine that had gone to this place and seen at this monastery. And do you know what? The whole time she was there, they didn't show her this bush. And they didn't show her the flames on it. Instead, they took the tour group and they gave them a big, dirty, filthy lecture on how Jesus is God and Mary is the mother of God. Now, how can God have a mother? Well, horrible. Instead of educating the people to something scientific that could produce faith in Moses and give more of an insight in what it's all really about, they use that as a time to continue promoting the things that are stated in this book by the late Reverend Alexander Hislop. Now, if we get a picture of this book is called The Two Babylons, and it's written by the late Alexander Hislop. And it's known to be, if we get a closer shot of that, the history of the worship of Nimrod and his wife Semiramis. And these were two people that lived approximately 4000 BC that created the triune religion of the Trinity that infected Christianity and the other world religions. Now, Jesus wanted to bring the knowledge of the creator of the universe and everything in it, not just to the 12 tribes of Israel, but to everybody else. Because it says we should love our neighbor as ourselves, and that didn't just mean our neighbor that was in the other tribe next to us. It meant our neighbor in Greece and in China and in Japan and in Africa and everywhere, regardless of race, creed, or color. But today, although these things have been stated, we find that the religions have become polluted by corruptions. And the thing about Nimrod is he was made to be a god where people would worship this human being in the place of the creator of the universe. And they created clergy classes that vie for power, that bring in corruption and indoctrination and in dogma. And this is the sad part of Christianity. That Christianity never conquered paganism, as the Christians would like to believe that they're saved. In fact, it's paganism that conquered Christianity, and it's the cause of warfare, strife, and prejudice. For example, the United Nations in New York, instead of being a forum of an international assembly of countries, where each country has a vote of one, is ruled from a Security Council of 15 members, where 4 countries basically run the show: England, the United States, France, and Russia, which are Christian Trinitarian nations that all possess the nuclear weapons, that want to disarm the Muslim countries because of the oil there. And we find that it's big money bankers and such that control the governments and manipulate the news media and the educational system and these other things. And we have a vicious cycle. So what can we do about it? Well, every now and then people need to sometimes get a bump on the head. Now, we're not giving people a bump on the head. We're pointing out that if they can't use their intellect to find out about that comet that caused the Red Sea to part, or about that bush that really burned, and investigate further into the nature of the reality of Moses and the other ones that have come to the world through education, then they're headed for these type of calamities. Because it's kind of the nature of things, like putting your hand in the fire. The punishment is remedial, but it's built into the crime. And these people at the UN have been putting their hands, so to speak, into the fire, which has caused international retribution as well as retribution within this country. Now, in previous programs, we have shown that the poison gas that was used down in Waco, Texas, and we did this about 3 years ago, is type of poison gas that is banned by the Geneva Convention laws of war. This gas that Bill Clinton and Janet Reno used in Waco, Texas, is the same type of gas that the Geneva Convention has banned the United States or any country using on any foreign people. But our news media doesn't present these facts, although on this program we've been speaking of those facts ever since that massacre in Waco and long before anything happened in Oklahoma, which is just another tragedy because of the imbalance of our leadership and the people that are unable to turn to a solution. Now, are we advocating violence? We are advocating, as the Baha'is under the provisions of the covenant, justice. Are we pro-racists and terrorists or pro-Muslim? We're not pro any of these groups or individuals or their methods at all. You can't say that we're pro-Muslim because Baha'u'llah, that was a Jew descended from King David, was persecuted by the Muslim people. And he spent 40 years in prison, and his son Abdul-Baha 40 years. And they martyred over 20,000 Baha'is. So you can't say we're pro-Muslim. We're certainly not pro-terrorist, like the United States being a big bully holding the nuclear weapon over the other third world countries as a type of terrorism. So what are we for? We're for justice. We're pro-justice. And if the Muslims is getting a double standard, or being put together in concentration camps in Bosnia and rape camps where 50,000 women were raped, we are against that type of atrocities and crimes against humanities. And we do not believe in us or them situations at all. And we've been speaking out on this point for over 4 years and have been trying to educate the people. That is the goal, that we are pro-justice, and therefore we see that the world today is in the primary and most desperate need of an educator. Now, who is Baha'u'llah? Well, he's descended from King David. He's not some mad Arab coming out of the desert spewing poetry out of his mouth. And he revealed that to eliminate all the clergy and have an independent investigation of the truth and an unorganized spirituality throughout all of humanity. There is no church or clergy that's paid in the Baha'i faith at all. But when people work together in groups, there has to be some sort of format and setting to keep them from killing each other. A peaceful resolution to differences that will always arise. And this comes through talking. In France, they say parler, which is where the word parliament comes from, or Congress. That Baha'u'llah reveals blueprints for an international government of the universal house of justice, in which all the nations of the world, regardless of race, creed, or color, will elect representatives to sit there, and a descendant of King David will be the chairperson of that body. He's not a king with absolute power. He has no veto power. He only has a vote of one, and he chairs the assembly. And if he votes in the minority, he still, as the executive, must carry out the majority decision. And this body is to have freed from all error, because if they made a mistake in their legislation or adjudication on the international level, we'd have injustice in the world. Now, we could have peace on earth without justice, but that would be tyranny. We must have peace on earth with justice, and once the nations recognize it, they will disarm with their nuclear weapons, for no one nation should possess these. But the International Assembly would be able to control that. And the individual people that are armed will willingly disarmed once they see that their rights and privileges and prerogatives and inheritances are protected by such a just system. We don't want to rule the world. It says that the hearts of men is the property of God, and this is what he would seize upon. But we have to have a world order. Tsar Alexander knew this. He and his father before him helped free Baha'u'llah from prison in Tehran. And Baha'u'llah wrote to Alexander from Akka, the prison in the ancient part of Israel, of the Ottoman Empire. And he said, "O Tsar, free your serfs. Make freedom of the press." And the Tsar was known as the Liberator Tsar. And he set forth the Emancipation Proclamation to free the serfs and implement all of these reforms. And he wrote to Abraham Lincoln. And he says, I will free the serfs and the Jews and the other minorities in Russia if you free the black man in your America. So Abraham Lincoln duplicated this influence of Baha'u'llah upon Tsar Alexander and wrote down the Emancipation Proclamation in America. And these are historical facts which are well defined in history that they was in contact with Baha'u'llah's message. But because he freed the serfs in Russia, the aristocracy assassinated him, and he was never able to set up the world government. So Tsar Nicholas took this upon himself to do this. But his wife, which was from Germany, started fooling around in the mysticism of that crazy person, Rasputin, and brought terror into the people. And the Tsar at first was going to proclaim Baha'u'llah. He called the people together in The Hague for the World Court. And he said we could have an international assembly of nations to hear these things. They said, Tsar, that's such a great idea. You must be a genius. And he says, well, thank you. And his head swelled. And he forgot to proclaim Baha'u'llah. And then he went after Rasputin, and his whole family was wiped out from these atrocities after the Russian Revolution. We had a calamity in that area. Now we're at a point where there has to be another type of situation which is unavoidable. Woodrow Wilson's daughter was a Baha'i, and he set up the World Court based on this. The United States failed to join. We had World War II. Because of the World Court of the Tsar failing, we had World War I. The UN is an imitation of Baha'u'llah's plan. The Roosevelts, for political reasons, would not state that they was influenced by the Baha'i message. But since Teddy Roosevelt met Abdul-Baha in 1912, Eleanor, his disciple, and that of FDR, set up the UN based on this plan. But these Christian countries have gobbled up all the power and have used their money and banking and nuclear weapons to peer pressure the rest of the world. And they've become a beast. The eagle's wings represents the United States. The bear's feet's Russia. The leopard's body is France. And the lion's mouth's England. And this is depicted as the beast in Revelation 13. And it's to be destroyed, it says, by a thermonuclear blast in a lake of fire. And people thought this was a joke until our pointing this out before it happened got on national and international news media of the Trade Tower bombing being a omen for what's happening because of these corruptions. Therefore, our message is one of safety, security, and salvation for the people. There's an educator alive in the world today that has preserved the true plan of Baha'u'llah, that even though 5 million Baha'is have turned the Baha'i faith into a money-making racket, apparently and absolutely true, Dr. Leland Jensen alone has preserved the meaning of this covenant. And is he some big Hottentot, puffed head? No. He's like Moses had Joshua. He's a modern Joshua to establish this message of Baha'u'llah. And he happens to be a great educator. That's one of the reasons I'm able to know certain of this information, because my education was not derived from college or any upbringing that I was spared the victimization of being indoctrinated. But in my adult life, I came into contact with this teachings of this great educator that's establishing the message of Baha'u'llah. And it says nobody gets to the Father but through the Son. He's the way, the truth, and the life. Well, the Father represents the revelation of Baha'u'llah. And the Son is that revelation of Jesus, but only on his second coming. And if the Christians remain indoctrinated in the Trinity and don't go by science and other things, or look for a mythical figure to come out of the sky in a cloud, they will never recognize the educator standing in the room right next to them. And you know what? Were they to ask him any question on any abstruse subject, he's certainly comprehensive. And he would have the remedy that Baha'u'llah brought. Now, Dr. Jensen doesn't receive a dream or a vision or a revelation direct from God, but like Moses that was on the mountain that received this from the Creator directly, Joshua learned from Moses. Baha'u'llah received this 100 years ago or so in 1863 to 1892. And Dr. Jensen happens to have preserved this. And the city of Missoula is blessed by having the school that he's established, this house of study, a Bet Midrash, here in this city. And tonight, we have a special presentation for you that gets into the science of Albert Einstein. and you want to stay tuned for more of this educational message. Okay. Hello, you're on the air. You're on the air.
Yes, I'm still on. So I'd like to know what Jesus did during his lifetime, and when he was a kid, when he was a child too, during his lifetime when he was a kid, and was he a religion that he went to? What religion? Jewish or I knew that, and I think he could have been.
Do you have a question?
What did he do when he was in the daytime when he was 10 years old? And the things he went through. Did Jesus work any miracles when he was a kid? I think. And I don't know. That's about all I'd like to know. Appreciate it.
Wait. So what's your question?
God bless you. Just that. Okay.
Whether he
what Jesus did, when he was a kid, I guess. I heard he came with mud on his feet in his home, and then he kept looking for Jesus, and he couldn't find him and everything. I said, he was out doing. And thank you, and that's all.
Okay, thanks. It was kind of hard to hear with some of the noise going in the background, but if you want to call back, that's fine. What I got out of it is the caller wanted us to get into what did happen to Jesus while he was a child, and some of the things that he did at that time. And what we find is that in history it talks about 40 different gospels that was written, and only 4 of them gets into the scriptures. And so these other books were kept out of the canon of what's known as the New Testament for different reasons, but in the East these books are known. And some of these Gospels gets into the history of what Jesus was doing as he was growing up, after he was born in Bethlehem, during his time in Egypt, and before he was baptized by John. And sometimes what happens in religion is they attribute different types of miracles to the ones. Like they says he walked on water and he healed the blind and these type of things. Well, the main point here is that this gets the people into thinking that this is the way to recognize a promised one that's sent by God. Now, one of the things that we find is that after somebody is gone, you don't know for certain if these things actually occurred or not. For instance, a charlatan could come up and say that they did this miracle or they performed that miracle, and you wouldn't know for actual, factual, certain one way or the other. For instance, the Christians refused to accept Buddha and Krishna, yet the people in those countries attribute great miracles, the same type as are attributed to Jesus, to Buddha and Krishna. Likewise, the Muslims attribute these types of things to Muhammad, like a night journey where he rode a horse up into the 7th heaven, and other types of things. And also, the concept of not dying. So the Christian says this is a miracle, that Jesus resurrected and he didn't die, and therefore he's the Son of God. But in the Bible, we find there's 2 other people that didn't die before Jesus. Enoch, which in the book of Genesis says that God took him. So he didn't die. And then it says that in the list it says that Adam came and he had a son, and then he was so old when he died. And Seth had a son, he was so old when he died, and then so on and so on. But when it gets to Enoch, it says that when he was such and such an age, he didn't die, but God took him. And the other one's Elijah. Elijah went out into the wilderness with his friend Elisha, and Elisha came back alone. And they said, "Where's Elijah?" And he says he didn't die. He says he went up into heaven in a whirlwind in a flaming chariot. So we have to take Elisha's word for this. So the same way the Christians say Jesus must be God because he's the only one in the history of the world that beat death and never died, it's just not true. The Bible tells us of 2 other people that it says didn't die, an Enoch and Elijah. And now for Elijah's case, we have to take Elisha for this. And for Jesus' case, it says, "O ye men of Galilee," in the book of Acts, the same Jesus that you see go up in heaven, in the same way shall he return. Well, there's no men of Galilee around here either that was eyewitnesses to this. So how can we recognize the truth of this? So the thing is that the manifestations of God and promised ones are not going to show up and fulfill people's expectations, like to fly around the room or do some sort of a trick or something, but that they fulfill prophecy. And because the people get different expectations in their head, they're unable to recognize these promised ones. One of the main reasons that the Jewish people to this day that is educated or that is indoctrinated by their rabbis and clergy won't accept Jesus in any way, shape, or form is that they teach that Elijah must come first. Now this comes out of the Old Testament in the book of Malachi, in the last book of the Bible, in the last 2 chapters of Malachi. It says, "Before the great and terrible day of the Lord, I'll send you the prophet Elijah." So here we have a person, Elijah, that in the 2nd book of Kings, 2nd chapter, didn't die, but went up into heaven in a whirlwind and flaming chariot. And in the last book of the Old Testament, that Malachi is prophesied to return. Well, at least the Jews don't think he's God because it doesn't say he didn't die, or a third part of God. They don't believe in this Trinity. And the reason they didn't is because Solomon broke the covenant and bowed down before Ashtoreth and Milcom, or Semiramis and Nimrod, and they worshiped the Trinity at one time. Raphael Patai writes a book called The Goddess of the Jews, showing when they was into like the Mother of God type concept of Semiramis and the Trinity that crept into Christianity and Catholicism and the other Protestant sects. So that these type of things are corruptions. Because of a calamity, such as Nebuchadnezzar destroying the Jewish people, they've remained monotheistic after this time, but they still have a prophecy for the return of Elijah. Well, when Jesus sent out his disciples to say that he was the promised one that had come, they came into contact with the intelligentsia, the scribes. And they says that he can't be the one because Elijah didn't return. And it says in 2 Kings he went up into heaven in a whirlwind and a flaming chariot, and that he'd point to the Messiah, it says in Malachi, and we didn't see anybody come down out of the sky in a whirlwind and a flaming chariot. Did you? And they says, no. They says, therefore, your Jesus is a liar. Well, they got all shook up, and they went back to Jesus, and he said to them, if John the Baptist is Elijah, if you're willing to accept it. They says, John, he's your cousin. You grew up playing marbles with him. This is paraphrasing a little. How could he be the one? Well, they went to John, and they said, are you Elijah? This is in the Gospel of John. And he says, no, I'm not. So when they asked him, he said he wasn't. So here Jesus says John is Elijah, and John says he's not. What's going on? Well, this is because John knew it wasn't crazy. He knew he wasn't the same person as Elijah. He wasn't the reincarnation of Elijah. He wasn't the return of Elijah's spirit or soul or any type of ghostly thing like this at all. So what Jesus was talking about wasn't the person of John, but he was talking about the light. That John the Baptist was a different lamp. That the same way Elijah lived in the desert 900 years before John, he was wearing a camel's hair coat, eating locusts and honey, and calling the people to repent and clean up their act and accept the covenant of Moses again. And so 900 years later, in the same desert, in the same garb, eating the same food, comes Elijah. And it would be like you had two lamps that was identical. And the one of Elijah, the lights turned off, and then 900 years later, we turn the one on for John. It's the same light in a different lamp. And this is what Jesus was referring to. But those people that wanted to go by miracles, like flying around the room, or these other things, was unable to recognize John in this way. And this is one of the main prejudices against the promised one that God sent to the people at that time, that deters them from being able to recognize Jesus, that Jesus of Nazareth fulfilled prophecy, but he didn't fulfill expectations. And the return of Jesus, you might say, well, what did he do in his childhood? See, like you mentioned him having mud on his feet. Well, Abraham Lincoln fooled his mom that he was kind of tall and they had mud on their feet, and he had his brother walk on the floor and leave muddy footprints. And then he had him walk up the wall, and then he held him upside down. He had him walk across the ceiling because their mom was always complaining that they didn't ever clean the place. So this shocked her. How could this happen? So anybody can, even if that's true or not, I have no idea. Just a story. You know, like George Washington slept here. Is that true or not? We don't know. So the thing is that anybody can make up a story, or in that case pull a trick where it looks like somebody was walking on the ceiling. That's just a hoax. So we want to avoid any types of hoaxes or hocus pocuses or anything like this. We want to know actual factual if somebody's a promised one sent to us by God. And what Jesus did do in his childhood that's important to us is that he fulfilled prophecy. When he was born in Bethlehem, this was spoken of by Micah over 500 years before Jesus was born, that he says he would be born in Bethlehem. And his parents didn't go there deliberately to have him and like pull a trick, but that they were forced to go there against their will when Mary was 9 months pregnant, because they had to register for the taxes of Caesar at that time. And if they wouldn't have went back there, they would have been put to death. So they went to Bethlehem against their will, and this is how Jesus happened to be born, fulfilling that prophecy. Well then, in order to escape the marauders and murderers of Herod and them that was killing the babies, like they killed babies at the time of Moses' birth, and Nimrod had the babies killed at the time of Abraham's birth, they went to Egypt. Well, when this is a prophecy also, it says, out of Egypt I will call forth my son. It's written in the scriptures, in the book of Isaiah and in other places. And so it showed that Egypt, that would be the protection for Jesus while he was growing up. So his years in Egypt fulfilled these type of things. And actually the word miracle doesn't even appear in the Old Testament. That in all the places in the Old Testament where it says, and Jesus performed a miracle, or it says he performed a sign or a wonder, the actual Greek word for that, which you can find in a Strong's Concordance, doesn't say miracle at all, or wonder. It's more close to the word sign, and what it says is that it was a prophecy that he fulfilled. that what he did is that he showed that he fulfilled a prophecy. For instance, he was born in Bethlehem, and he turned to the book of Malachi, and he fulfilled that verse when he was born. So therefore, it says it was a sign or a wonder. It was translated bad. It should say he produced a proof that he was prophesied of. And this type of gook creeps in long after the religions are formed, because people have had their way with the religions that have originated from God, that they could bring all their gobbledygook and interpretations in there. They figured if the people wouldn't use their intellect, they could make up any cotton-picking story and put it over on the people. And then some evil ones get in there, and they use the twisting of Scripture to promote slavery and to direct warfare against other people and create damaging and hellfire in this world for the citizens of it. And the citizens of it would be innocent of these things, except that they have it so, that they allow this leadership that's corrupt to be heaped up amongst themselves, that they have itchy ears, they listen to what they're saying. Whereas if the people, each and every one, was educated and free from these things, they wouldn't let these people be the leaders, and they wouldn't follow us forward into these wars and destruction and damnation. And for anybody that knows about these wars, that the body count of some of this is just unbelievable. By the time the Germans got done in Russia during that war, they estimate that there, and what Stalin did, they estimate that there was like 27 million dead just from the siege against Leningrad and other areas. And of course, when Stalin rose to power, there was millions that died after that. After Vietnam, we had the killing fields, which they say numbered to 6 to 7 million people. Hitler in World War II with 6 million Jews and 6 million intellectuals, artists, gypsies, and other people that were just non-desirables. And these numbers are so large that they almost numb the mind to accepting the reality of this. If you went out your front door and found 5 bodies piled up on the street in a bloody mess or all bloated from disease, you'd be completely horrified. You know how many bodies 27 million would be? And they'd pile up down the block. You'd be as high, and they fill up the whole city in the streets. They had to make mass graves. When you go there to this day, they have a grave site, and there's a stone there, and it says mass grave on it. And it just says 50. And then you go to another stone, and it says 100. And you go to another site, it says 50 or 500. And there's no names on these stones, just the number of bodies that they had to dump in them. And they had no idea what the identity of these people was at this time. And this is the same thing that's happening in Bosnia right now, where the Serbs was able to set up concentration camps and rape camps for the Muslim women. Over 50,000 Muslim women raped. We hear about a rape case here in America, and people are appalled. But then, because of the UN that said if the Muslims in Bosnia disarmed, we guaranteed, as the United States of America, to protect those people, and the UN guaranteed their safety, and then we abandoned them. Well, this is neglect. Now, if anybody was raising a child and they abused the child, this is abuse. And of course, the child should be protected. But another type is abandonment. If you don't feed the child and ignore them, leave them at home alone, and maybe there's no heat in the apartment and they die of exposure, you're just as guilty as if you were to beat them to death with a bat. It's called neglect. Well, when we promised, this United States of America made a covenant, and this UN made a covenant to protect those Muslim Bosnians if they disarmed, and we'd recognize them, and then we abandoned them to the Serbs that was Christian and allowed the setting up of these rape camps, that this is an atrocity, which is neglect, and it's considered to be a crime against humanity. Now, why is it that one person would go to prison for 20 years if something like this were to happen in a city, and it might be extenuating circumstances because of the poverty level in this country, whereas a government can do it and get away with it on the scale of millions, and nothing even happens to them? And this is the type of injustices which Baha'u'llah has brought a remedy for this sick world, that the divine physician today, that is the establisher of the Baha'i faith, that is Dr. Jensen's establishing in this world. And the people can't accept that, because how could he be the great educator if he's standing next to me? And they say, I don't care if his name is in Zechariah 3, where it said he'd remove the iniquity of that land, or the land in one day, and this is his name being Joshua the high priest. If he didn't come out of the sky in a cloud like Elijah, they're just not going to have anything to do with them. And this is the detriment of being indoctrinated that prevents the people from getting the true education that they need from the promised one of today. And it's actually the religions in practice today which contribute to the news media corruption and that of the bankers, which prevents the people of recognizing the remedy for right now. Hello, you're on the air.
Hi, I have a question for tonight.
Sure.
And the question is about the rapture at the end of the world. I read in the Bible, I read the Catholic Bible, and it says that in the last days, when Christ comes, the dead shall rise up from their graves, and the stars shall fall out, and the sun shall destroy the earth with a ball of fire.
Okay.
According to the rapture. Can you tell me more about this? Thank you.
Sure. Okay. The first thing is that it says that the dead will rise out of the tombs. See? And then you said that the sun would destroy the earth in a ball of fire. And you wanted to know about the rapture. Okay. No matter what Bible you read, if it's a Catholic Bible, that's fine by me, that you want to read the chapter in the book of Matthew. You want to read Matthew chapter 23. Right before Jesus in chapter 24 gives the time frame in Daniel when his second coming will be. In verse 3 of 24, they ask him when he will come again. And in verse 15, he says these dates are already in the book of Daniel, where you see Daniel speaking of the desolating sacrilege. We find this in Daniel chapter 8 and Daniel chapter 12. And the number of 2,300 years, which will be in your Bible, is 1844. Which is the beginning of the Baha'i calendar set up by the Bab. And then the ones in chapter 12 is 1260, 1290, and 1335. 1260 on the Muslim calendar is the same as 1844 AD on March 21st, which is the beginning of the Baha'i era of the Bab. Then, 1,290 years from the proclamation of Muhammad on lunar brings us to April 21st, 1863, the proclamation of Baha'u'llah. And Abdul-Baha explains the 1335 or solar years from the victory of Muhammad in 628 AD, which brings us to the 100th anniversary of the proclamation of Baha'u'llah, or April 21st, 1963, which is the date for the beginning of the ministry of Dr. Jensen as the establisher of the Baha'i faith. Like Paul was the establisher for Jesus, Ali of Muhammad, or Joshua for that of Moses. He's like a modern Joshua. So therefore, it says the dead must come out of the tombs. So in Matthew chapter 23, he's telling us what the dead are and what the tombs are, so that when we get to chapter 24 and get the dates of when this is going to happen, we'll already be educated. And he tells us that the tombs, he says, O clergy, you Pharisees and Sadducees, you are like dead men's bones in whitewashed tombs. And Joe explained this earlier, that these tombs is the teachings of the clergy, the sepulchre. And the dead is the people that's in these tombs believing in the crap of this clergy class, which has so indoctrinated the minds and the behaviors of the people, to the point where they would be enemies of the great educator, the promised one, when he comes today to help establish a system by wherewith we can have peace on earth and all the nations can elect the house of the Lord, and we can have the true international congress of Baha'u'llah, of his universal house of justice, and not this United Nations. This is the mission of Dr. Jensen, to bring forth this divine elixir that the rest of the Baha'i world throughout to make a money-making business. And in them making this a money-making business, they've turned their spiritual assemblies, so-called, all throughout the world into whitewashed tombs, just the way the churches, one on every street corner, becomes a whitewashed tomb like the synagogue and these other things. The teachings in there is dead and they's not alive. Although it's words, or anybody can have words, they say love your neighbor. And just about any of these tombs preaches love your neighbor. But the thing about it is, deeds is what you don't see and is scarce and hard to come by. And this is why their teachings is all dead to anybody that can see it on face value. And the other reason it's dead is they're enemies of this coming of this promised one that's the educator for today. So who are the dead? Well, Jesus in another place in the gospel says, come on, we're going to go to another town. And the person says, I can't come with you. I have to go to a funeral. It's that of my father's died. And he says, let the dead bury the dead. You come with me. Well, when Jesus said, let the dead bury the dead, did he mean that the dead people should come out of the graves and pick up shovels and pitchforks and bury the other dead guy? No. He meant that those that didn't believe, that is, couldn't see the reality of his mission and therefore was blinded from this and cut off and didn't believe in who he was spiritually dead. That although they moved around and could eat food and were physically there, they were spiritually dead. And today the dead is those dead that's in the tombs. Now there's a lot of people that was in the tombs of the Catholic Church and the Christian sects and other ones that have come forth. The scripture says the dead in Christ will rise first. Those people that are dead in the sepulchres of the Christian clergy is the first ones to accept Baha'u'llah to be the return of Christ, that descendant of David that's come, that's anointed, as he's prophesied of throughout the scriptures. And they can see that miracles and this other gobbledygook isn't the criteria. The stars in heaven that are to fall from the sky, this has already happened. The stars is our leaders, like our movie stars. We call them stars. Like O.J. Simpson, we said he's a star, but now that he's in this wrangled up situation, they says he's a fallen star. Well, the stars in the religion of God is the Pope and the clergy and the priests. And whereas the stars was there to help guide us for navigation at night, and they help us map the earth and geography, he's saying that these stars, which was supposed to be those minor lights in the religion of God, has fallen to earth, meaning that the clergy has become god-awful corrupt and turned Christianity into a money-making business. So these stars, such as Billy Graham and Jimmy Swaggart and Jerry Falwell and all these other ones, they're the fallen stars that could have been the great promoters of true Christianity that became the cheap sidewalk hawkers of the Trinity to just snake oil the people into their type of wrangling, money-grubbing business. And they pass a beggar's pot around after all their assembly meetings to prove that they're in it for nothing but the money. And they live in a big mansion. They say Billy Graham has got he lost a lot of blood and he passed out, and I guess he's headed for the next world. Well, would you like to be in his shoes when you get to the other side? He thinks he's done good, that he's going to be seized with a trembling that's indescribable for spreading this crap around. They say he's the most powerful evangelist for the Trinity since the Crusades. Well, the Crusaders, the Pope's busy apologizing for all the atrocities that they committed, and the worst of all is spreading this Trinity around the world, getting people to turn away from an unorganized spiritual cause and to have an organized clergy class and to worship a man in the place of God. Nothing could be more worse than this, and it's the cause of these dilemmas. So the people that promote this are the stars that have fallen from heaven. The power of the sun, which is said will scorch the earth like a ball of fire. The sun is a thermonuclear reaction. So this is a nuclear blast, and more than one that will take place. It says a third of humanity will be consumed when the sun scorches the earth, meaning this thermonuclear war takes place. That because God saw fit to give the Muslims the oil, but to give the Christians the rulership of the world and the nuclear bomb, the Christians are busy with the big bomb trying to disarm the Muslims to get the oil. The Jews are kind of in the middle in Israel, with the United States supporting them and the Russians mostly supporting the Muslims, two nuclear superpowers, and the whole thing's set up for World War III. The earth-shifting crust will be the last wind of destruction that will occur. So then you want to know about the rapture. Well, where's the word rapture mentioned in the Bible? Well, the Christian says, I'll show you where, and they open the Bible. See, it says here 2 people will be in the field, and one is taken or snatched out. They say that means raptured. And one is left. And see, 2 people will be in the middle, and one is snatched out, and the other one's left. See? And they says it's the one that's snatched out that's raptured. Well, what's that mean? Well, people might have interpretations for that, But we're not interested in interpretations. We want to know what it says. Well, what we find that it says is Jesus himself explains this pretty plainly. He says it'll be like one that went out and sowed a great wheat field, and the wheat came up. And it says that night they all went to sleep, and there was weeds that came up the next day that was next to the wheat. And one of them says, "Oh, good master, who planted all these weeds? We just planted wheat. Where did the weeds come from?" And he says, "The evil one planted these while we was asleep." And they says, "Well, do you want us to go pull out the weeds right now?" And he says, "No." He says, "They're growing too close to the wheat." He says, "Wait until the end time of the harvest, when they're all grown up big." And he says, "Then harvest it all at once, and take the weeds and snatch them out." See? And he says, "And throw them in the fire, and leave the wheat behind in the barn." So those that are snatched out in the raptures, the weeds, those that get raptured are snatched out as the weeds, and they're thrown into the fire. And those that are left behind is the wheat in the barn that's left to inherit the kingdom. So because these stars of the clergy have fallen from heaven, and their teachings is these dead men's bones and whitewashed tombs, we're headed for a thermonuclear war, which is the fire, which the weeds are raptured and thrown into. And how does this happen? Because these fallen stars, like Jerry Falwell and Jimmy Swaggart, they say to their believers, stay in your big cities and don't worry about it. They says, what will happen is, right when the nuclear war is to happen, Jerry Falwell says, you'll be raptured, and you'll be whisked up into the sky, and then those cities will be nuked, and the world will be burned up into a crispy cinder, and then Jesus will wave his hand and recreate the earth, and everybody will come back down to inhabit this. See? Well, because the people believe that, they aren't going to leave cities of 100,000 or more, which are the targets. Therefore, they're going to stay in these cities where the fire is going to be, and they will be raptured. They'll be thrown alive into this fire, and there won't be any more. Now, they think that we're supposed to meet Jesus in the sky. Well, it doesn't say that. It doesn't say he'd come out of the sky. It says he went up into heaven, he'd return the same way. Well, this is the mistake that happened with John the Baptist and Elijah. They says he didn't come out of the sky. Well, it didn't say so. Elisha said he went up to heaven in the whirlwind and a flaming chariot. Well, the Jews didn't know the difference between heaven and sky. The Christians are going to fall into the same mud puddle. It doesn't say sky, it says heaven. This is the heaven of prophecy. While Jesus walked amongst the people, he said he was in heaven. He said, I come from heaven, I'm in heaven, I go to heaven. Well, then they laughed at him. What? He says he's in heaven, he's not in the sky. He didn't come down out of the sky, he came from the womb of Mary. They said he was a nut, a real fruitcake. They couldn't believe him. Well, he didn't say the sky. He said heaven. He was born in Bethlehem. He came from the heaven of prophecy. During his life, he came out of the land of Egypt, and everywhere he went, he fulfilled prophecy in their midst. And he went fulfilling prophecy through denial and crucifixion and death. And he returns from heaven of prophecy the same way they came in rejection, denial, imprisonment, and martyrdom. The Bab was imprisoned and martyred with 750 rifle rounds. Baha'u'llah was 40 years in prison. Dr. Jensen spent 4 years in prison. And these promised ones of God, for some reason, get a raw deal from God. Well, it's to show that they don't have a personal motive for this, that in order for them to be in the place where they are to be, it has to be against their will. And so we see that Baha'u'llah went in Israel, but as a prisoner in chains in Akka, which is in the book of Hosea, chapter 2, verse 13. His address is there. And on Mount Carmel, this was as a prisoner in exile, which is in the land of Israel to this day. And Jesus was born in Bethlehem because they had to register for the tax. And Dr. Jensen had the stone with 7 eyes before him, spoken of in Zechariah chapter 3, against his will. And so this is to show the sign for this. He didn't go down there knocking on the door and say, hey, let me in, I'm the Joshua, or something like this. So these ones come from the heaven of prophecy. But these fallen stars from heaven, the clergy, they promote this concept that deludes the people into thinking they're going to meet him in the sky. It doesn't say it says heaven. Well, what it does say is with a loud trumpet call, they'll meet him in the air. Well, if you were to go up in the sky about 2 miles where they say they're going to meet Jesus on his return, there's no air up there. There's zero air. The air is down here on earth where our feet is. So if they're going to meet him in the air, it's because he's going to be standing right next to him fulfilling prophecy. and he'll have the answers as this great educator. And we'll recognize him because his name will be given, his place will be given, his date will be given, and his mission will be given. Well, we've already explained the date of 1963 on April 21st to 1335 years, well, which works out to 1963. The days are years. Abdul-Baha explains this. And the address is have the stone with 7 eyes before him, spoken of in Zechariah chapter 3. And this fulfills the prophecy here in Montana, in Deer Lodge, in the valley there. And this is not only the stone with 7 eyes in Zechariah 3, but it's purported and it's described by Ezekiel to be a stone temple with 7 towers. And it's also described in the last 9 chapters of his book that this would be the address. And in chapter 44 it says he go in there through the gate that faces east, which is tower number 7, which is how he went in and how they come out. And it says after he goes in there, the gate will be locked. Well, within the first 2 weeks that he was there, they announced they were closing the old prison because of the atrocities that was there and opening a new facility. If you were to go there to this day, that front door is locked. It fulfills this chapter of Ezekiel 44. And his mission, and his name that is the land. Le is French for the, and land is land. This is his name. And Leland. And this is in Zechariah chapter 3 in the 9th verse. And that of his mission is to set up the courts. And he sets up the courts and judges the house that Baha'u'llah revealed to reestablish this in the world. But because the people believe in rapture and these type of concepts, they're far removed from ever even getting to the standpoint of recognizing an individual to be one of these divine educators sent to God, whether the great independent manifestations of God or his other promised ones or those that also have minor roles to fulfill. And so God has never abandoned the people, but every people, nation, race, and one of the world has been sent divine guidance, either from these independent manifestations of God, of which there have been 9 in the Adamic cycle: Adam, Moses, Krishna, Buddha, Zoroaster, Jesus, Muhammad, the Bab, and Baha'u'llah, or the innumerable number of minor ones that have been throughout the different countries at the different stages of evolution and the different periods of maturation, or those of the other particular promised ones that's here to help us from a catastrophe like Noah, to protect us with the Ark of the Covenant from the baptism by water of the flood, and that of the return of Jesus today to protect us with the Ark of the Covenant of Baha'u'llah from the baptism of fire, thermonuclear, that the world will go through, with the second wind of destruction being a meteor that hits the earth, a great earthquake, and an earth-shifting crust like Joe York has spoken of. Well, we're out of time for tonight. I can see that there's no more calls on the line, and we appreciate you calling in, and we'll be back next week here at Channel 7 on MCAT. We'll see you at 7 o'clock in the evening, like usual, on Friday. And you'll be able to see a replay of tonight's program Monday morning at 10 or 11, and part 2 also Tuesday at 10 or 11 a.m. And we'll see you then.